อ้าว สวัสดีค่ะหนูลืมปิดไมค์อ่ะหนูลืมปิดไมค์ไม่เป็นไรไม่เป็นไรนุ๊กได้ยินไปแล้วไม่เป็นไรหรอกก็สวัสดีทุกคนได้นะคะสวัสดีรอบ2ของวันนี้นะก็วันนี้จะมาอ่านเรื่อง The Little Prince ให้ฟังThe Little Prince ก็ในรอบที่แล้วอ่ะที่ลงเป็นคลิปให้คือพูดตั้งแต่ intro ไปจนถึง chapter 1ใช่ไหมเพราะฉะนั้นวันนี้เราจะเริ่มที่ chapter 2นะครับแสบตามากแม่ขอใจแว่นแป๊บเราจะเริ่มที่ chapter 2นะครับโอเคนะก็สวัสดีโอ้ยภูมิอันเดนจิมมี่ยาวด้วยนะใครต้องไปนอนก็ไปนอนได้เลยนะแล้วก็หนังสือของวันนี้เป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะครับก็ถ้าใครอ่านอังกฤษไม่ออกหรือว่าไม่เข้าใจภาษาอังกฤษก็ขอให้สู้ๆนะครับลูวี่ไม่สามารถช่วยคุณได้เพราะลูวี่จะไม่ได้แปลนะก็ขอให้สู้ๆกับการฟังภาษาอังกฤษในครั้งนี้นะจ๊ะโอเคเพราะฉะนั้นเราจะเริ่มกันนี่มันไลฟ์ก่อนนอนใช่ก็คือถ้าใครแบบฟังไปแล้วหลับก็หลับได้เลยไม่ได้ว่าอะไรนะ ใครฟังไปฟังมาหลับนะคะก็หลับได้เลยไม่ได้ว่าอะไรนะแต่หลังจากนี้ไม่น่ามีไลฟ์แล้วล่ะมั้งแต่ก็มีคนติดเกมนะคะมีคนติดเกมเรียบร้อย1 EA นะตอนนี้ในหัวมีแต่แกะเต็มไปหมดเลยขอกินน้ำแป๊บโจฮาสวัสดีค่ะกินน้ำแล้วก็แจ้งว่าระหว่างที่อ่าน audiobook จะไม่มีการตอบแชทนะคะเพราะฉะนั้นถ้าใครส่งแชทมาอาจจะไม่ได้ตอบแล้วก็โดเนทด้วยนะคะ ถ้าใครส่งโดเนทมาระหว่างอ่านหนังสือบี้จะไม่อ่านนะแต่บี้เห็นนะคะแต่บี้จะไม่ได้อ่านนะเพราะว่าอ่านหนังสืออยู่นะโอเคนะคะทำความเข้าใจกันเรียบร้อยก็ตอนที่ขึ้นหน้าอ่านหนังสือจะเป็นอีกซีนหนึ่งจะเป็นซีนไม่มีตัวโมเดล V ด้วยนะครับจะไม่มีโมเดล V ด้วยแล้วก็จะเป็นแค่รูปนะเป็นรูปเฉยๆเลยนะก็เดี๋ยวขอเซตฉากซุ่มได้เพราะว่าไม่ได้อ่านแชทด้วยนะคะจะไม่ได้ตอบแชทเหมือนกันนะฉะนั้นใครจะซุ่มเงียบฟังไปนอนนะคะกล่อมนอนก็ได้หมดได้ทุกอย่างตามใจคุณนะคะตามใจที่คุณชอบตามใจเลยนะแล้วก็อันนี้ก็พูดอีกว่ารูบี้ไม่ได้อ่านหนังสือเก่งนะเป็นเด็กที่ไม่ได้ชอบอ่านหนังสือเลยเพราะฉะนั้นก็จะมีเหมือนอย่าคาดหวังการอ่านที่อ่านตรงเนาะได้เลยนั่งฟังเพลินๆได้ครับยังไงก็จะทำงานไปดูไปโอเคคงไม่ได้ฝันร้ายนะก็ไม่ได้อ่านเรื่องสยองขวัญให้ฟังซะหน่อยมีขยับของแป๊บอ้าวล่วง ASMR ของล่วงโอเคแล้วก็จะมี BGM คอด้วยนะอีกหน้านึงเพราะฉะนั้นเราไปเริ่มกันเลยนะครับจัดการ The Little Prince, Chapter 2. So I kept my own company without anyone who I could really talk to until 6 years ago when I made a forced landing in the Sahara Desert. Something had broken in my engine, and as I had neither mechanic nor passengers with me, I braced myself to attempt a difficult repair job all alone. It was a matter of life or death. I had barely enough drinking water to last a week. On the first night, then, I went to sleep on the sand 1,000 miles from all human habitats. I was more isolated than a shipwrecked man on a raft in the middle of the ocean. So I imagine my surprise to be woken at daybreak by a funny little voice saying, "If you please, draw me a sheep." What? Draw me a sheep? I leaped to my feet, completely thunderstruck. I rubbed my eyes slowly. I looked around slowly, and then I saw a most extraordinary little fellow who stood there solemnly watching me. Here is the best likeness that later on I was able to make of him. The drawing is certainly far less delightful than the original, but that is not my fault. I had been discouraged by the grown-ups in my career as a painter. When I was 6 years old and had never learned to draw anything except the insides of boas and the outsides of boas. Now I was staring at this apparition before me, my eyes popping out of my head. Remember, I was 1,000 miles from all human habitation, yet this little fellow seems neither to have lost his way, nor to be dying of exhaustion, or hunger, or thirst, or fright. Nothing about him suggests a child astray in the middle of the desert. 1,000 miles from all human habitation. When I finally found my voice, I said, But, what are you doing here? To which he merely repeated very slowly, as though it were a matter of great consequences. If you please, draw me a sheep. When a mystery is too overwhelming, you do not dare to question it, absurd as it might seem to me. 1,000 miles from any inhabited places and in danger of death, I took a sheet of paper and a fountain of pen out of my pocket. Then I remembered that at school I had only properly studied geography, history, arithmetics, and grammar. So I told the little fellow, brackets, with a touch of irritation, close brackets, that I didn't know how to draw. He replied, That doesn't matter. Draw me a sheep. As I had never drawn a sheep before, I copied out for him one of the two pictures that I did not know how to draw. The boa constrictors seen from the outside, and I was astounded to hear the little fellow says, No, no, no. I don't want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. Boas are very dangerous, and elephants are very cumbersome. Where I come from, everything is tiny. What I need is a sheep. Draw me a sheep. So I drew him one. He studied it carefully, then he said, No, that one is already very sickly. Do me another one. So I drew him another one. My friend smiled, gently, even indulgently. Surely you can see for yourself that's not a sheep, it's a ram. Look at the horns. So I did my drawing once more, but it too was rejected, like the others. This one is too old. I want a sheep who will live a long time. My patience was by now exhausted, for I was in a hurry to start dismantling my engine. So I rapidly scribbled the drawing you see below. Then I added by way of explanation, this is a box. The sheep you want is inside. And many to my surprise, I saw the face of my young judge light up. That's exactly how I want him. Do you think this sheep will need a lot of grass? Why? Because where I come from, everything is tiny. Oh, there's bound to be enough. I have given you a tiny sheep. He bent over the drawing. He's not as small as all that. Look, he's gone to sleep. And so it was that I made the consequence of a little prince. Chapter 3. It took me a long time to discover where he came from. The little prince who asked me so many questions seems never to hear the ones I asked him. It was from chance words dropped here and there. That all was relevant to me. For instance, when he noticed my aeroplanes for the first time. I am not going to draw in my aeroplanes. It would be far too complicated for me, he says. What is that thing over there? That is not a thing. It flies. It's an aeroplane. It's my aeroplane. And I was proud to have him know that I could fly. And which he cried out, What? So you fell from the sky? Yes, I answered demurely. Well, how very funny. And that little prince broke into a charming peal of laughter, which I found greatly irritating, for I like my misfortune to be taken seriously. Then he added, You too, then? Come from the sky? Which planet are you from? Suddenly I had a glimmer of understanding into the mystery of his presence here, and I quizzes him sharply. So you come from another planet? But he made no reply. He merely shook his head gently, looking all the while at my airplanes. No, you can't have come very far on that thing. And he fell into a long reverie. Then, taking my drawings out of his pocket, he became absorbed in the contemplations of his treasure. You can imagine how intriguing I was by his confidence. You can imagine how intrigued I was by this half-confidence. About other planets, I did not utmost, therefore, to find out. Where are you from? Then, little fellow, where is this? Where I live, that you mentioned. Where do you want to take my sheep? After a reflective silence, he answered, The best thing about the box you've given me is that at night he can use it at his house. Of course, and if you are good, I will give you a rope to tether him with during the day, and a post to tether him to. This proposal seemed to shock the little prince. Tether him? What an odd idea. But if you don't tether him, he may go anywhere and end up lost. And my friend burst out laughing once more. But where do you imagine he would go? Anywhere straight ahead of him. At which the little prince remarked solemnly, Then that won't matter. Where I come from, it's very small. Then with perhaps a hint of sadness, he added, Straight ahead does not take anyone very far. Chapter 4. From this I learned a second fact of great importance. The planet he came from was very scarcely bigger than a house. This was no great surprise to me. I knew very well that beside the important planets Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and so on, to which names have been given, there are also hundreds of others, some so small that one has trouble finding them, even through the telescope. When an astronaut discovered one of these, he gives it a number instead of a name. So he might call it, for instance, Asteroid 3251. I have a good reason to believe that planet from which the little prince came from is the asteroid known as B612. This asteroid has only once been seen through the telescope by a Turkish astronomer in 1909. At that time, the astronomer made a grand presentation of his discovery before an international congress of astronomy. But since he was wearing Turkish national costume, nobody would believe him. Grown-ups are like that. Fortunately for the reputation of asteroid B612, a Turkish dictator ordered his subjects, on a pain of death. To convert the Europeans' dress in 1920, our astronomer repeated his demonstration wearing elegant evening dress. This time, everyone accepted his proof. The reason I have told you so much about asteroid B612 and let you know its number is because of grown-ups. Grown-ups love figures. When you describe a friend to them, they never ask you about the important things. They never says, what's his voice like? What are his favorite games? Does he collect butterflies? Instead they demand, how old is he? How many brothers does he have? How much did he weigh? How much did his father earn? Only then do they know him. If you say to a grown-up, I have seen a lovely house made of pink bricks with geraniums in the window and doves on the roof, they are unable to picture such house. You might say, I saw a house that cost 100,000 francs. Then they cry out, oh, how pretty. Again, you might say to them, the proof that the little prince existed is that he was enchanting, that he laughed, and that he was looking for a sheep. When someone wants a sheep, it is proof that they exist. The grown-ups will merely shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child. But if you tell them, the planet he came from is asteroid B612, then they will be convinced and will spare you all their questions. That is how they are. You must not hold it against them. Children have to be very indulgent towards grown-ups. Of course. For we who understands life, figures are quite unimportant. I would have liked to begin this story in the manner of fairy tale. I would have liked to write, once upon a time there was a little prince who lived on a planet scarcely bigger than himself and who was in need of a friend. To those who understand life, that would have a much greater air of truth. You see, I do not want my story to be taken lightly. I have suffered so much grief settling down these memories. Already 6 years have passed since my friend went away along with his sheep. If I try to describe him here, it is certain as not to forget him. To forget a friend is sad. Not everyone has a friend, and if I do forget him, I might become like those grown-ups who no longer care for anything except figures. It is for those reasons, too, that I have brought a paint box and some pencils. It is hard to take up drawings again at my age, when the only attempts you have ever made were of a boa constrictor. From the outside, the boa constrictor from the inside. When you were 6 years old, of course, I shall try to make my portrait as true to life as I can. But I am not at all sure of succeeding. Some drawings work, others do not. Sometimes my proportions are wrong. Here the little print is too big. There he is too little. Other times I waver over the colors of his clothes, and so fumbled along trying this and that as best I can. I may even make mistakes as to important details, but there you must forgive me. You see, my friend never gave explanations. Perhaps he thought I was like him. But I, unfortunately, am not able to see sheep through the walls of boxes. Perhaps I am a bit of a grown-up after all. I must be getting old. Chapter 5. Each day I learned something about the Little Prince planet. His departure from it, his journey, the details came very slowly. In the course of conversation, so it was. On the third day that I learned about the terrible baobabs. This time, once again, I had the sheep to thank, for abruptly as if seized by grave doubts, the little prince demanded, "Is it true, isn't it, that sheep eat small bushes?" "Yes, it is true." "Good, I am glad." I could not see why it was so important that sheep could eat small bushes. But the little prince added, "Then it follows that they also eat baobabs?" I reminded the little prince that baobabs are not small bushes, but trees the size of churches, and that even if he took a whole herd of elephants home with him, they will not succeed in dispatching a single baobabs. The idea of herds of elephants made the little prince laugh. They would have to be stacked on top of each other. Then he observed, wisely enough, baobabs before they grow big start off small. So they do. But why do you want your sheep to eat up the baby baobabs? He merely replied, "Oh, come on, come," as if it went without saying, and I had to make a great mental effort to work out the problem on my own. In effect, there were on a Little Prince planet, as on every planet, good plants and bad plants. And consequently, there were good seed from good planets and bad seed from bad planets. But seed, as everyone knows, are invincible. They sleep in the secretly of the earth, until one of them suddenly decided to wake up, so it stretches itself and timidly, at first extended towards the sun, a vanishing, innocent little shoot. If this happens to be a spring of radish, or the beginning of a rose bush, you can leave it to grow whether it wishes, but if it turns out to be a bad plant, you must root it up at once, the very instant you recognize it. Now there were some terrible seeds on the Little Prince planet, namely those of the baobab trees. The soil of the planet was infected with them, and a baobab, if you tackled it too late, can never be got rid of afterwards. It clutters everything. It would bore right through a planet with its roots. And if the planet is too small, and if the baobabs are too numerous, they will finally make the planet explode. It's a question of discipline, the little prince informed me later on. When you finish washing and dressing each morning, you must carefully wash and dress your plants. You must force yourself to pull up the baobabs regularly as soon as they can be distinguished from those rose trees, which they resemble so closely in each youth. It is very tedious work, but is very easy. And one day he suggested that I set about making a beautiful drawing so as to give children on my planet a clear idea of all this. Then if one day they travel, he says, that will be one use to them. Sometimes one can safely put off what needs doing until later. But in the case of baobabs, it always ends in disaster. I knew a planet that was inhabited by a lazy fellow. He neglected 3 little bushes, and guess what happened? So following the Little Prince's direction, I have made a drawing of the planet. I don't much like adopting the tone of a moralist, but the purlieu of baobabs is so little understood, and the risk run by anyone who strays onto an asteroid are so considerable that for one, I will break my usual reserve and say categorically, children beware of baobabs. It is to warn friends of a danger they have skirted unknowingly for too long. As I myself have done that I worked so hard at this drawing, the lesson I had to pass was worth the trouble it has cost me. Perhaps you are asking yourself, why are there no other drawing in this book as magnificent as the baobab drawing? The answer is quite simple. I tried with the rest but did not succeed. When I drew baobabs, I was driven on by a sense of urgency. Chapter 6. Little Prince, so it was, gradually, that I came to understand your melancholy little life. For a long time, your only pleasure had been to watch the gently setting sun. I learned this new detail on the morning of the 4th day, when you said to me, I am very fond of sunset. Let's go this moment, and looked at the sunset. But we shall have to wait. Wait for what? Wait until it's time for the sun to set. At first you seemed very taken back. Then you laughed at yourself and said, I still keep thinking I'm at home. Just so, for as everyone knows, when it is noon in the United States, the sun is setting over France. If you could get to France in a twinkling, you could watch a sunset right now. Unfortunately, France is rather too far, but on your tiny planet, Little Prince, you had only to move your chair a few steps. You could watch nightfall whenever you liked. One day, you said, I watched the sunset 40 times. And a little later you added, you know, when one is that sad, one can get to love the sunset. Were you that sad then, on the day of 43 sunset? But the prince made no answer. Chapter 7. On the 5th day, thanks to the sheep, as always, the secret of the Little Prince's life was finally revealed to me, without preamble, as though voicing aloud a problem he had long meditated in silence. He abruptly asked, if a sheep eats small bushes, will it therefore eat flowers? A sheep eats everything in its path, even flowers with thorns. Yes, even flower with thorns. So what is the use of thorns? I did not know the answer. At that moment, I was busy trying to unscrew a bolt that had got stuck into my engine. I was very worried, for my breakdown was beginning to look very serious, and the low reserve of drinking water made me fear the worst. So what's the use of horns? The Little Prince never gave up on a question once he asked it. I was irritated with my bolt, so I said the first thing that entered my head. Thorns are no use whatsoever, they are simply a foul way of being spiteful. Oh! There was a silence, then he retorted with a kind of bitterness. I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. They are naive. They reassure themselves as best they can. They think they are being frightening with their thorns. I made no answer. At that moment, I was saying to myself, If this bolt resists any longer, I am going to knock it out with a hammer. The little prince interrupted my thought once more. But as for you, you think that the flower? Not at all, not at all. I think nothing. I told you the first thing that entered my head. As for you, I happen to have serious matter to attend to. He stared at me in amazement. Serious matter? He looked at me, hammer in my hand, fingers black with grease, bent over some machine that seems to him merely ugly. You are talking like a grown-up. This made me feel a little ashamed, but he continued relentlessly. You are confusing everything. You are mixing up everything. He was truly very angry. He was shaking his golden locks in the breeze. I know a planet where a certain purple-faced gentleman lives. He has never inhaled the scent of flowers. He had never looked at the stars. He has never loved anyone. He has never done anything except add up figures and all day long. Just like you, he repeated to himself. I am a serious person. I am a serious person. And this makes him swell up with pride. But he is not a man. He's a mushroom. What? A mushroom? The little prince was now quite pale with anger. For millions of years, flowers have been growing thorns. For millions of years, sheep has been eating flowers nonetheless. And is it not a serious matter to try and understand why flowers go to such trouble producing thorns that will never be at any use to them? It is not important that war between sheep and flowers. It is not more serious and more important than the calculation of a fat red-faced gentleman, and if I personally know a flower which is unique in the world, which existed nowhere except on my planet, but which one little sheep can destroy it in a single bite. Just like that, one morning, without even noticing what he's doing, well, I suppose too. If of no importance, he flustered and continued. If someone loves a flower, of which there is only one example among all the millions and millions of stars, that is enough to make me happy. When he looked up at the sky, he says to himself, somewhere out there is my flower. But if a sheep eats the flower, it's as though all the stars have suddenly gone out. But I suppose that, too, is of no importance. So he could not say more. His words were choked by sobbing. Night has fallen. I had let my tools drop to the ground. I no longer cared a fig for my hammer or my bolt, or about thus or about dying. On one stars, one planet, this planet, the Earth, there was a little prince in need of consoling. I took him in my arms. I cradled him. I told him, the flowers you love is not in danger. I'll draw you a muzzle for your sheep. I'll draw you a shield to put around your flower. I did it. Not really know what to say. I felt like a blundering idiot. I did not know how to reach him, where to catch up with him. It is such a secret place, the land of tears. Chapter 8. I soon learned to know more about this flower. The flower on the Little Prince planet had always been very straightforward. Adorned with just a single row of petals, they took up no room and troubled no body. They would appear one morning in the grass, only to fade away in the evening. But one day a very particular flower had sprung up from a seed blown from who knows where. and the little prince has kept a very close eye on this shoot, which was so unlike the others. After all, it might have been a new strain of baobabs. But the shrub soon stopped growing and started getting ready to produce the flower. The little prince watched the growth of an enormous bud, convinced that some miraculous apparition must follow, closet in her green room. However, this flower took an age preparing herself to be beautiful. She chose her colors with care. She dressed slowly, adjusting her petals one by one. She did not want to come into the world all crumbled like a field poppies. She wanted to appear only in the full radiance of her beauty. That's right. She was very stylish. Her mysterious preparation lasted for days and days. Then one morning, exactly at sunrise, she suddenly revealed herself. And after laboring with such painstaking precision, she merely said with a yawn, "Oh, I am scarcely awake. You must excuse me. I'm still all disheveled." At this, the little prince could not contain his admiration. "But you're so beautiful, aren't I just?" replied the flower sweetly. "And to think I was born at the same amount as the sun." The little prince soon guessed that this flower was none too modest, but how thrilling she was. Surely it must be time for breakfast, she announced shortly. "Would you be so kind to attend to me?" And the little prince, all flustered, fetched a water can of cool water and proceeded to wait upon the flower. From the beginning, then, she began to torment him with her somewhat touchy vanity. One day, for example, talking about her fur thorns, she said to the little prince, "Let them come, the tiger with their claws." "There are no tigers on my planet," the little prince interrupted. "In many cases, tigers do not eat weeds. I am not a weed," the flower murmured sweetly. "Forgive me." "Nor am I in the least afraid of tigers, but I do not have a horror of droughts. You wouldn't happen to have a screen to hand?" "A horror of droughts? That is bad luck for a planet," the little prince remarked, and added to himself, "This flower is very complicated. In the evening you may place a glass dome over me. It is very cold on your planet. It lacks convenience, where I came from." Here she interrupted herself, for she had come in the shape of seeds, and could not possibly know anything about the world. Ashamed at letting herself be caught on the verge of such a naive lie, she coughed 2 or 3 times to make the little prince feel at fault. About that screen. "I was going to fetch it, but you were talking to me." At which she pretended to cough once more, so that he might suffer some remorse just the same. So it was that the little prince, despite the willing nature of his love, had soon come to doubt his flower. He had taken a face value her words of no importance, and they made him very unhappy. "I should not have listened to her," he confided to me one day. "You must never listen to flowers. You must simply gaze at them and breathe them in. My flowers perfume my world planet." But I was unable to appreciate her. All the nonsense about claws, which I found so irritating, ought to have endeared her to me. He continued his confidence. "In those days I understood nothing. I should have judged by her deeds and not her words. She cast her fragrance around me and brightened my life. I should never have run away. I should have guessed the tenderness behind her poor little stranded gem. Flowers are so contradictory, and I was too young to know how to love her. Chapter 9. I believe that for his escape, he took advantage of a flight of migrating wild birds. On the morning of his departure, he set his planet in good order. He carefully swept out his active volcanoes. He had 2 active volcanoes, which were very useful for heating up breakfast in the morning. He also had an extinct volcano, but as he used to say, one never knows. So he swept out the extinct volcano too. So if they all went well, volcanoes burned slowly and steadily, without erupting. Volcanic eruptions are like chimney fires. Here on Earth we are, of course, far too small to be swept out of volcanoes, which is why they cause us endless trouble. With a feeling of sadness, the little prince then uprooted the last little shoots of baobabs. He was thinking he might never return here. And on this last morning in the familiar task, all seems very precious to him. So that then he watered his plants for the last time and prepared to place her under her glass dome. He found that he was on the verge of tears. Goodbye, he said to the flower, but she did not reply. Goodbye, he repeated. The flower coughed. But this was not on account of her cold. I have been an idiot, she said to him at last. I ask your forgiveness, try to be happy. He was taken back by this absence of reproaches. He stood there all disconcerted, the glass dome suspended in midair. He could not understand this sweet composure of her. Yes, yes, of course I love you, the flower said to him at last. You had no idea, which is my fault. It is of no consequences, but you have been as foolish as I. Try to be happy, and leave the glass alone. I don't want to be in it anymore. But what about the wind? My cold is not as bad as all that. The cool night air will do me good. I am a flower. But what about insects? I simply have to put up with 2 or 3 caterpillars if I want to meet some butterflies. I have to heard that they are very beautiful. Otherwise, who will visit me? You will be far away. As for wild animals, I am not afraid of them. I have my claws. And she innocently showed her 4 thorns. Then she added, don't hang about like that. It's irritating. You decided to go, now go. For she did not want him to see her tears. She was such a haunted flower. Chapter 10. He found himself in the vicinity of asteroid 325, 326, 327, 328, 329, and 330. So he started by visiting these to find some occupation and to educate himself. The first was inhabited by a king, clothed in purple and ermine. The king was sitting on a very simple yet majestic throne. Ah, here comes a subject, exclaimed the king when he caught sight of the little prince. And the little prince said to himself, how can he recognize me when he has never seen me before? The little prince did not realize that for kings the world is very simple. All men are subjects. Come near so that I may see you better, said the king, who felt very proud at last to be king in the eyes of somebody. The little prince looked around him quickly for somewhere to sit, but the entire planet was taken up by the king's magnificent ermine robe. So he remained standing, and because he was tired, he yawned. It is contrary to etiquette to yawn in the presence of a king, said the monarch. I forbid you to yawn. I can't help myself, he replied the little prince, quite ambitious. I had a long journey and have not slept. In which case, said the king, I command you to yawn. It is years since I have seen anyone yawn to me an object of curiosity. Hurry up, yawn. Yawn again. That is my command. Now I feel intimidated. I can't. Just at the moment, mumbling the little prince going very red in the face. Replied the king. In that case, I command you sometimes to yawn and at other times to... He muttered something and seemed put out. For what the king fundamentally insisted upon was that his authority be respected. He would not tolerate disobedience. He was an absolute monarch. At the time, since at heart he was a very good man, he made his command reasonable. He would often say, were I to command a general to change into a seabird, and were this general not to obey, it would not be the general's fault. It would be my fault. May I sit down? The little prince now inquired timidly. I command you to sit down, replied the king, majestically drawing in a fold of his eremite's mantle. The little prince was astonished. This planet was minuscule. Over what precisely could the king be said to read? Sir, he said, I beg to be excused for asking you a question. I command you to ask me a question, the king interjected hurriedly. Sir, over what do you read? Over everything, replied the king with huge simplicity. Over everything? With a quiet gesture, the king indicated his planet, the other planets, and all the stars. All over that? Asked the little prince. All over that, replied the king. For not only was he an absolute monarch, he was a universal monarch. And do the stars obey you? Naturally, said the king. They obey promptly. I do not tolerate indiscipline. The little prince marveled at such power. Had he wielded it himself, he have been able to sit and watch not 40 full sunsets in a single day, but 72, even 100, even 200 without ever having to move the chair. And since at the thought of his life-forsaken planet, he felt himself becoming sad. He plucked up courage to ask a favor of the king. I would like to see a sunset. Do me this kindness, command the sun to set. Were I to command a general to fly from one flower to the next, like a butterfly, or to write a tragedy, or to change into a seabird, and were this general not to carry out my command, which of us would be in the wrong, he or I? You would be, said the little prince firmly. Correct. One must require of each what each is able to give, continued the king. Authority rests first of all upon reason. If you command your subject to go and throw themselves into a sea, there will be a revolution. I have the rights to demand obedience because my orders are reasonable. And my sunset? The little prince reminded him for he never forgot a question once he asked it. You shall have your sunset, I shall insist upon it, but I shall wait, in keeping with my science of government, until conditions are favorable. When will that be? Inquired the little prince. Replied the king, consoling an outsized almanac. That will be at around that will be this evening at around 20 minutes to 8. Then you shall see how I'm obeyed. The little prince yawned. He was regretting his missed sunset, and he was already beginning to be a little bored. I have nothing further to do here, he said to the king, so I'll be on my way. Don't leave, replied the king, who was very proud at having a subject. Don't leave. I shall make you a minister. Minister of what? Of justice. But there's nobody here to judge. We do not know for certain, said the king. I have not yet made a complete tour of my kingdom. I am very old. There is no room here for a state coach, and it tires me to walk. But I have already looked, said the little prince, betting again to glance around the other side of the planet. There is no one over there either. In that case, you shall judge for yourself, replied the king. This is the most difficult thing of all. It is far more difficult to judge oneself than to judge others. If you succeed in judging yourself correctly, then you are truly a man of wisdom. But I can judge myself anywhere, said the little prince. I do not need to live on this planet. Said the king. I do not believe that somewhere on my planet there is an old rat. I hear him at night. You may judge this old rat. From time to time, you will condemn him to death. Hence, his life will depend on your justice, but you will reprieve him each time, so as to save him up. He's the only one we have, but I don't like commanding to death, said the little prince, and I really do think I should be going now. No, said the king. Having completed his preparation, but with no wish to distress the old monarch, the little prince said, If your majesty wishes to obey promptly, he might give me a reasonable command. He might, for example, command me to leave within the next minute, if it seems to me that conditions are favorable. As the king made no reply, the little prince hesitated. Then, with a sign look, he took his leave. I made you my ambassador, the king cried out hurriedly after him. He had a wonderful air of authority. Grown-ups are very strange, the little prince said to himself as he continued on his voyage. End of chapter 10. And that will be it for today.เสร็จแล้วนะครับเอาแค่นี้ก่อนอ่านไป9 บทเจ็บคอจัดโปรดติดตามตอนต่อไปใช่แล้วเจ็บคอปวดตาด้วยไม่เอ้ยมันเข้าใจยากอยู่นะจริงมันเป็นหนังสือที่เข้าใจยากมากอะ7 ชั่วโมงนึงแล้วเนี่ยเจ็บตามากหลับตาแป๊บนึงนะ ยากจริงมีแต่คนแปลกอันดอกไม้อะดอกไม้เหมือนเขาพยายามจะสื่อถึงคนเหมือนผู้หญิงอะเหมือนดอกไม้เขาพยายามจะสื่อว่าดอกไม้เป็นผู้หญิงที่ชอบแต่งตัวชอบดูแลตัวเองแล้วเหมือนพอสวยมากห่วงสวยอะแล้วก็คิดว่าตัวเองแบบดูแลตัวเองได้ประมาณนั้นปะห่วงสวยเดี๋ยวก็ไม่เข้าใจอยู่ดีอาจจะต้องไปดูใหม่ปะก็ยังไม่เข้าใจเลยทำไมวะแต่แกะเข้าใจอยู่ไอ้รูปแกะเข้าใจแต่ดอกไม้มันเฉยๆวะน่าจะตีความได้หลายแบบไม่ได้เป็นเล่นเกมเมื่อกี้อ่านหนังสือแล้วมันเพ่งไปนิดนึงไอ้แกะเข้าใจประมาณว่าเหมือนถ้ามีใครมาขอให้เราทำอะไรสักอย่างอะแล้วมันแบบเหมือนไม่ถูกใจเขาสักทีอะเราก็ทำแบบเนี้ยแล้วให้เขาแบบเหมือนจินตนาการเอาว่ามันเป็นแบบที่เขาชอบนั่นแหละทำเป็นแบบอะไรสักอย่างอะเหมือนให้เขาไปคิดเองอะมันก็จะโอเคแต่ว่ามันก็เหมือนอัพพลายในชีวิตจริงไม่ค่อยได้ไหมอะมันยังไงวะมันดีนะแต่มันอัพพลายยากมากเลยอะปวดตาชิบหายว้าบี้กำลังคิดว่าเดี๋ยวบี้ปิดสตรีมอันนี้แล้วแน่นอนคือบี้ไปกดแกะต่อแน่นอนอะบี้ไปกดแกะต่อแน่นอนคือก็เลยจะถามว่าอยากดูแกะไหมหรือว่าแบบไม่ต้องดูก็ได้ไม่ได้อยากดูขนาดนั้นแบบไม่ดูก็ไม่เป็นไรอย่างเงี้ยเอาแต่อย่างนั้นเลยคือมันเล่นแกะต่ออยู่แล้วไงหรือไม่ดูก็ได้นะแต่บี้ก็จะไปเล่นอยู่ดีอะก็ไม่รู้ว่าแบบขึ้นดีไหมเพราะยังไงก็มันก็เล่นแกะอยู่ดีเดี๋ยวพักเสียงหน่อยก็ดีงั้นบี้ไม่ขึ้นก็ได้พักสายตากันไหมเฮ้ยเดี๋ยวมันก็ได้นอนแล้วสบายใจเพราะนั้นเดี๋ยวบี้ไปเล่นเองเดี๋ยวบี้ไปนั่งเล่นเองจะได้ไม่ต้องพูดดีไหมวะดีเหมือนกันแหละจะได้ไม่ต้องพูดแล้วแต่ครับผมหลับไปตั้งแต่ต้นไลฟ์แล้วเพิ่งตื่นนี่แหละอ๋อโอเคครับที่รักเดี๋ยวบี้ปิดไลฟ์แล้วดีกว่าให้ทุกคนไปนอนนะคะแล้วเดี๋ยวบี้ไปกดแกะ เดี๋ยวบี้ไปกดแกะเองก็ได้แบบกดแกะถ้าไม่ต้องไลฟ์สตรีมก็ดีนะผมจะได้เหมือนมีเพื่อนตอนทำงานด้วยเดี๋ยวไปนั่งเล่นในดิสก็ได้ผมไม่เป็นไรจะได้แบบไม่ต้องพูดเยอะ อย่างนั้นก็เดี๋ยวปิดไลฟ์แล้วนะคะเดี๋ยวให้ทุกคนไปนอนเนาะแล้วเดี๋ยวเจอกันพรุ่งนี้นะคะจะไม่เสียงแบบจู่ๆเสียงเป็นไงล่ะเสียงแบบเหมือนตอนไปพากย์คลิปอะ เสียงเหมือนตอนเป็นภาคคลิปอะงั้นจะเจอกันพรุ่งนี้นะคะทุกคนกับคาราโอเกะนะเสียงแม่งเจอกันพรุ่งนี้นะเป็นคาราโอเกะนะเป็นเพลงเบาๆอย่างเดียวเลยเพลงเบาเวอร์ชั่นของรูบี้นะเบาของรูบี้นะจ๊ะเบาของรูบี้นะงั้นเจอกันนะบ๊ายบายจุ๊บ